Good morning. So it feels like I have been gone a lot this summer, and I was not expecting to be gone this morning. I've got a class that I have to take up in Wisconsin this week, starting tomorrow morning, and I needed to be there this evening, and so I had to take the train up, which leaves at 7:30 on Sunday morning. So I think this is the last time I'm going to be gone for a while, and I apologize for bringing the message to you in this way. But I didn't want to let any more time go by without digging in where we started in Mark's Gospel. I told you when we started this series that I think this is a really important series because Mark is one of the most challenging books of the Bible for me. It's not that I don't know the stories, because Mark relates a lot of the same events that the other Gospels do, but Mark tells them in different ways, and he leaves out a lot of the details that I like to know. As a 21st century child of the Enlightenment, I like all the details, and Mark doesn't give the details a lot of times that I want to know. But we're going to dig into this. We started a couple of weeks ago in the beginning of Mark chapter 1, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen that, go back and watch it, because you're going to need to know some of those themes that Mark starts developing right off the bat. Now, picking up this morning in the second part of Mark chapter 1, it's kind of hard sometimes now for me to tell stories from growing up, because my mom attends church here now, and so I have to, there's like a whole new danger with telling stories growing up. But as we pick up where we do this morning in Mark's Gospel, I got to thinking about the time that I was fishing with my mom and dad, and I cast my rod without paying attention, which I usually did, and I hooked my mom right in the mouth. Not good. Now, to her credit, she stayed very still, very calm. My dad was ready to kill me and went to work removing the hook from her mouth. But I tell that story about me being careless and foolish when I was younger for two reasons. First, it shows you the miracle that my mom still loves me and wants to be in this church with me. But two, it was that day that I became a fisher of humans, like Jesus calls the disciples to become in Mark chapter 1, where we're going to pick up this morning. Not exactly, thankfully, in the same way that I did, but it's a jumping off point for what we hear about in the second part of Mark's Gospel. We're going to go through a big piece of Mark chapter 1, much bigger than the week that we began. So let's jump in and read about Mark's version of some people fishing, becoming fishers of humans, and the things that happen in the town on the Sea of Galilee after that. Now, I want to read this to you uninterrupted, because you should remember that the early Christians who heard the Gospel of Mark would have been hearing it. They would not have been reading it for the most part. Only about 15% of people in the Middle East at the time of Jesus were literate. And so they heard the Gospels with their ears, and I want to encourage you to hear the story this morning. Would you stand, please, for the reading of the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to St. Mark. As he passed alongside the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw Simon and Andrew, Simon's brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. "Follow me," Jesus told them, "and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat putting their nets in order. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. They went into Capernaum, and right away he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and began to teach. They were astonished at his teaching, because he was teaching them as one who had authority and not like the scribes. Just then, a man with an unclean spirit was in their synagogue. He cried out, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit threw him into convulsions, shouted with a loud voice, and came out of him. They were all amazed, and so they began to ask each other, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once the news about him spread throughout the entire vicinity of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went into Simon and Andrew's house with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was lying in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. The fever left her, and she began to serve them. When evening came, after the sun had set, they brought to him all those who were sick and demon-possessed. The whole town was assembled at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place, and there he was praying. Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come." And Jesus went into all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Then a man with leprosy came to him, and on his knees begged Jesus, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. "I am willing," he told him. "Be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Then Jesus sternly warned him and sent him away at once, telling him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer what Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet he went out and began to proclaim it widely and to spread the news, with the result that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly. But he was out in deserted places, and they came to him from everywhere. The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to St. Mark. You may be seated. We begin with Jesus walking along the Sea of Galilee. I did that just a few weeks ago, and it's a beautiful place, more like a large lake, really, kind of like Rend Lake, than it is a sea. But Jesus is walking on the shore, and he sees two brothers that are out on a boat not far from the shore, as was their job. And he says to them, "Come with me, and I will make you fish for people." Now, we know from the other Gospels that there is literally more that's said in that moment, but this is all that Mark is concerned about us knowing. Mark just tells us what we need to know. That Jesus was calling these guys to leave behind their job fishing for fish to come and fish for people. And immediately, Mark says, they did that. Jesus calls them to follow him, which is what it means to be a disciple. That's what discipleship is. It means to follow. In this case, to follow Jesus. They become disciples of Jesus that day as they follow him, just as you and I are disciples of Jesus by following him and seeking to follow him 2,000 years later. And Jesus walks a little bit further on the Sea of Galilee, and he sees James and John with their dad working the family business in the family boat, and he calls to them and says for them to come and be his disciples as well. And they do. And they walk away from their vocation and from their father. Now, to us, this idea of calling people to be fishers of men or fishers of people, fishers of humans, is unique and is kind of weird. I know a lot of you have heard it in the church, but it's actually a metaphor that's used in the Old Testament. Several of the Old Testament prophets used it, and they use it in a way that maybe is different than what most of us realize. The Old Testament prophets talk about fishing for people, being fishers of men, as basically being a gathering in of people for judgment, to face God's judgment. And so it's probably a little bit different than how you have often thought of the phrase fishers of men, because we tend to think of it as just calling people to follow Jesus or trying to convert people to Christianity. But the key idea behind the metaphor of gathering people in is bringing them in like fish to be more or less cut open, to be filleted, which is, not all that pleasant sounding, but the idea here is that just as fish are brought in to be opened up and cleaned up, cut open, God is fishing people in to open them up and to empty them out, and that they'll be totally changed by this experience. In fact, who they were will die. They will, in a way, die like the fish. They will be killed in God's judgment. And that sounds rough, but it's there in the metaphor in the Old Testament. So it's not me being weird. Jesus purposefully uses this and alludes to this Old Testament language of fishing for people. Not literally hooking or killing anybody, but bringing people in to experience God's judgment. And you might wonder, in such a big piece of scripture, why I would hone in on that particular metaphor, but it's because I want to make sure that you get the chance to hear it right at least once. To be fishers of men is to bring people before God for his judgment. Mark is all about the fact that Jesus is bringing in a new reign, that Jesus is powerfully taking authority, and that everything is changing. Jesus, following in the footsteps of John the Baptist, is calling people to life change, to radical life change. And you need to know that. People need to understand the stark call that Jesus is making. He's not like other political revolutionaries or prophets or rabbis from this time or any other. He's playing a much higher stakes game than that. He's calling for the reshaping of all creation. Rabbis and prophets would call people to follow Yahweh, to follow the God of Israel. But Jesus says to these guys, follow me. Jesus is claiming authority. We see next when Jesus goes into the synagogue at Capernaum, another example of him claiming authority. This is, the synagogue is basically the Jewish church house. Jesus goes in and he begins teaching from the Old Testament, but Mark says that people are amazed at the way that he's teaching, the way that he's talking. He's not talking like the scribes or the other Jewish leaders. He's teaching as one with authority, Mark says. In Greek, they use the word exousia. Jesus is speaking as one with exousia, speaking as one with dominion, one with authority, one who is claiming full control. And people get that. They get that Jesus is claiming full control. And when they see that lived out in front of them, they're going to be shocked, because they're going to see the authority of Jesus when one of their, we would say one of their church folks, one of the people in their synagogue, shows to have an evil spirit, a demon. And that demon calls out, yells out, screams out in the middle of the service as Jesus is teaching, interrupts him and says, "Jesus of Nazareth, what do you want with us demons? Are you here to do violence against us? Are you here to kill us?" Not just destroy, it's stronger language than that. "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Are you here to kill us?" And the demon then says, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, if you had been a first century Jewish or Greek audience hearing this from Mark for the first time, hearing this account for the first time, it would have made us gasp out loud. Because what the demon is trying to do in this moment, and the way that the culture understood things is to show that it knows Jesus. Not that it just knows who he is in a generic sense, but in that culture, if you knew someone, if you knew their name, if you really knew them, you could exercise power over them. So the demon challenges Jesus' authority, and that would have scared everybody, frankly. Everybody except for Jesus, of course, because we talked 2 weeks ago about the fact that Jesus was prepared for this in the wilderness and his basic training when he was out there being messed with by the devil. The demon says, basically, oh yeah, you've got authority, I've got authority too, because I know who you are. And Jesus responds to the demon by yelling with authority, shut up and leave. Get out of him. In the Greek, that's what Jesus says. He says, shut up and leave, get out of him. And basically the demon throws a fit, as they do. He does leave, as Jesus says, but he throws a fit. They get out of him. Jesus has publicly shown his authority and dominion over the forces of evil. This is not something that the rabbis or the prophets or anybody else was doing. And so people were astonished, it says. Mark says. Thambeo is the Greek word. They're amazed and a little bit frightened by what they see. Amazed with a side of scared. This is shocking. Who is this guy that even the demons obey him? They're realizing, Mark says, that Jesus has authority. You see him teaching and doing mighty acts. And we're going to see that pattern over and over again in Mark's gospel. Jesus will be teaching someone, teaching a group of people, and that's a very important aspect of what he's come to do. And then he'll be interrupted as he's doing that by somebody showing up with a pressing need, somebody crying out for help. And then he'll be shown in Mark's gospel doing a mighty act. So he's teaching and doing. He's teaching and healing. He's teaching and demonstrating the power behind what he's teaching. He's showing his authority to say what he's saying. His miracles are vocational. It's what one of my seminary professors taught me. And what he means by that is that they have a purpose. They're not just cool tricks. His miracles are vocational. They have a purpose. They have a job to do. He's showing, by doing them, his authority over the elements of creation, over good and evil. Jesus has authority. And Mark wants us to see that. And he says that the word about this spreads right away throughout all of Galilee, all over this part of the country. People hear about what's happened because this isn't commonplace. They've never seen anybody doing the things that Jesus is doing. Meanwhile, after this happens, Jesus and the disciples leave the synagogue. It's Shabbat. It's the Sabbath day, the Jewish Sabbath. And they walk a very short distance, less than a block away, to Simon Peter's mother-in-law's house, where Peter and his wife evidently were living there in Capernaum. And when they get there, they tell Jesus, hey, this is Peter's mother-in-law's house, but she's in bed really sick with a fever. And it's hard to culturally translate the importance of a fever because we think of a fever as being just a symptom. It's a symptom of a broader problem, a symptom of something being wrong, of having a virus. But in the Jewish world, it's taken very seriously. And a fever was even seen as something spiritually rooted, something maybe that people would even say as a curse. And so a fever was something that a doctor didn't have the ability to fix. God alone could fix it. The rabbis called a fever heavenly fire. So it was sort of a fire that God himself had lit that only God could put out. No medicine, no doctor would do it. But Jesus isn't fazed when he hears this. He walks into that house, part of which I showed you is still standing there in Capernaum. And I showed you a picture of it. he goes into Peter's mother-in-law's bedroom where she's laying there with a fever, and he takes her hand, which is interesting because he touches a sick person, a person with a fever, and we'll see him do this over and over again, touch sick people, showing that he's unafraid of the illness, he's unafraid of being unclean. And in Greek, it doesn't just say that he heals her, it says he brings her back to life. She was evidently very, very bad off. And Jesus just takes her hand and he lifts her up, and she's immediately back to normal. Mark says that the fever abandons her. That's the language that he used. So it's not imagined just as sort of a physical healing, but the fever, the curse, runs away at the presence of Jesus when Jesus touches her. And she gets up and she immediately begins to serve. She does the same thing that the angels did in the first part of Mark chapter 1 that we talked about 2 weeks ago when it talks about them serving Jesus. They were serving him. She is serving him. She takes on that role of being a servant of Jesus. She's healed, and she's healed for a purpose. The authority of Jesus is shown, but also she is lifted up by Jesus to serve. She's healed for the purpose of becoming a servant. And that is our new purpose in Jesus as well. Just like Peter's mother-in-law, we are healed for the purpose of becoming servants. So I imagine then that Jesus has supper with Peter and his family and these other few disciples that he's called at this point. And it's the end of the day on Shabbat, on the Jewish Sabbath day. And as soon as the sun sets on Shabbat, and this is still true today in Israel, people suddenly have the freedom of movement again because Shabbat is over. And so when that sun goes down below the horizon, everybody starts to move about. There's freedom of movement again. And so there is a sudden difference that happens when night falls on that Saturday. And people, sort of come back to life. They get back out in the streets. And when this happens in Galilee, in Capernaum, where Jesus is, Mark says that lots and lots of people who were sick or demon-possessed come to the house where Jesus is staying, at Peter's mother-in-law's, because the word has gotten around in that part of Israel that Jesus has the authority to set folks free from evil spirits. He has the authority to heal in a way that is unique. And everybody wants a part of having him meet their pressing need. Mark says that practically everyone is outside the door to Peter's mother-in-law's house where Jesus is staying in. And Jesus is staying up late into the night, casting out demons and healing people that are sick. He's demonstrating in front of people's eyes the authority that he has over both natural and supernatural processes. He's demonstrating in Mark's gospel authority. And I keep coming back to that because I think even we as Christians in the 21st century tend to forget or ignore the authority that Jesus has, not just over our world, but over our lives. With all of the talk in the air right now in the culture about autonomy and our rights to ourselves, Mark is reminding us that Jesus has authority. That Jesus exercises autonomy. Jesus has the authority over all things. Not me and not you, but Jesus. In the early morning hours of the next day, before the sun ever rises, Jesus slips out of Peter's mother-in-law's place, and Mark says that he goes to a deserted place. It's the same description that's given of where Jesus is out in the wilderness for 40 days. But there is no desert in Galilee. And so it's just that Jesus needs to get away. He goes to a place separate from people to be alone, to gather his thoughts, and to be with the Father. Jesus is showing us that even he needs time alone with the Father. Even he needs silence. Even he needs to be removed from the crowd so that he can be restored. So I don't feel bad that I've learned that I need to go for a while and go sit a couple of times a day away and pray, because Jesus did it too. And if the Savior, the Lord, needed to do that, how much more so do you and I have that need? Because I don't think that we're stronger than Jesus. But then what's interesting here is that Peter, who's still called Simon at this point, and the other few disciples that Jesus had chosen, they set out to find Jesus, only the Greek doesn't say that they were sort of just gently out searching for him. What the Greek says is that they're hunting him down. Jesus is out praying, and these disciples are hunting him down. They're not happy that Jesus has left the place where he's quickly become a celebrity. There is Jesus stuff to do, and Jesus is nowhere to be found. He's out in the forest or up on a mountain or under a tree somewhere, maybe skipping rocks on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, praying and thinking and recharging with God. And the disciples interrupt him, and they basically demand that he come back, because they say he's got other stuff that he needs to be doing. Which is remarkable, right? Because just a day or two before, Jesus had called these guys and said, "Come follow me." And already these guys are struggling with that role, because now they're trying to get Jesus to follow them. And we're so much like those first disciples. We don't like the timing of Jesus. We don't like the laid-back pace of Jesus. We don't like that we, a lot of times, can't find him right now when we want to find him. And that he's not doing the work that we think that he needs to be doing. He's not doing the Jesus stuff that we want him to do. We want Jesus to follow our lead rather than us following his. We get confused about who's in charge. Or as Mark would remind us, who has the authority? The disciples say, basically, let's set up shop here in Capernaum. Things are good here in Capernaum. There's a ton of people that are ready for you, obviously. But Jesus says, no, it's time to move on and go somewhere else. He's not planning on setting up shop in Capernaum to be sort of the local faith healer or rabbi. He's going to go neighborhood by neighborhood throughout that rural part of Israel and Galilee, incarnationally, in person, on the ground, all over the place, to take his message on his terms in his time. Now, we don't know what that next town that Jesus goes to is in Galilee, but they go to it, and when they get there, there's a man with a skin disease, leprosy. And the man with the skin disease busts through the crowd that's around Jesus and does what no infected person is supposed to do. He gets right up in Jesus' face, and he falls on his knees in desperation. And Mark says that he begged Jesus to heal him. The man says, "I've heard about you. I know that if you want me to be made well, if you're willing for me to be well, I will be." And then, to me, things get really weird in the original Greek New Testament. Your English translation will likely gloss over it. The NIV does a better job than a lot of the others. Jesus, it says, gets angry when he sees and hears this man. And that troubled me when I realized that. Jesus gets angry at the situation with this man. And at first you might think it's because the guy is diseased. He's supposed to be quarantined. He's unclean. A leper was considered essentially in Jewish law equal to a corpse, sort of the walking dead. And so is Jesus angry that this guy rushes up on him and gets in his space? Because I felt that way, especially in the last 2.5 years post the coming of COVID. So is that what it is? It's not. That's not what's going on. Jesus is indignant when he sees the way that sickness has disfigured this man and the pitiful state of this man, having to get down on his hands and knees and beg Jesus for help. You see, a leper would have been deformed, frankly, would have been hideous. And Jesus' reaction here in the Greek is the same as his reaction, his emotional reaction at the tomb of Lazarus in John's Gospel, where he's described as angry like a war horse going into battle. Embrameomai. You know, I'm a big fan of that word. Jesus has a very strong emotional reaction to this leper, begging him for help. Jesus hates the disfiguring nature of illness and death and sin. It sets him on edge. And so Jesus responds to the guy, I do want to heal you. In fact, sometimes this word that's used here in the Greek gets translated as longing. Jesus is saying, I long to heal you. It's more than just I'm willing to do it. It's I want to do it. Yes, you said if I'm willing to do it, of course I want to do it. Of course I'm willing. And he does, but he does it again through touch. He doesn't just say the words be healed, but he reaches out, Jesus does, and he touches this man, this leper. And that would have been the first time in a very, very long time that anybody would have physically touched this guy since whenever the first sign of leprosy showed up in him, this disfiguring disease. That is the tender, compassionate nature of our God, to reach out and touch the unclean person. And in doing so, he makes the man clean again. He sets everything right. Now, interestingly, he tells the guy to keep quiet about what's happened because Jesus knows that if the word gets out, as it eventually will, about what's happened, about what Jesus has done, that this crowd, which is already so big and following him everywhere that he goes, that it's going to get so large that he's not going to have freedom of movement, basically. It's going to become more complicated. And so Jesus tells him, more or less, if you don't keep your mouth shut about this, things are going to get a lot harder. But the guy can't keep his mouth shut. He's like me. He has to tell somebody. And so Mark says that the crowd, wanting Jesus to do something for them, grows so large that Jesus can no longer actually go into the villages anymore, and he's having to do ministry on the outskirts of town. In fact, Mark specifically says that Jesus is doing ministry in the deserted places. Again, that same language from when Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, and Jesus going out into the solitary places to pray. He is out in the eremos places in the Greek. He's out in the deserted places or the forsaken places doing his ministry. Jesus is spending his time in the last place that you would expect him to be. He's not going into St. Louis, into an arena to do what he does. He's pitching his tent over in East St. Louis, where the buildings are falling down and where people would say, can anything good happen there? He's not coming to the Civic Center and holding a healing crusade. He's down ministering to people in the bombed out remnants of the city of Cairo, if you want to think about it in Southern Illinois terms, to get the imagery. He's in the forsaken places. He's in the desolate places. Jesus is doing his work, not where you would expect, but in those forsaken places. Praise band, go ahead and come forward and get ready to lead us. Don't feel the need to hear anything deeper than just what's there, just what we've seen, which is that Jesus is ministering in the desolate, forsaken places. He's not scared of those places. He's not better than those places. Jesus is meeting people in the last place that you would expect to find him. And in those places, he's touching the untouchable. He's doing the unthinkable. He's healing the unhealable. He's setting free people who are held captive by evil. We're beginning to see a lot about who Jesus is already just as we close this first chapter of Mark's gospel. So much is being developed here about the character and the nature of Jesus. And the New Testament tells us that if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. If you want to know what the Father is like, you look to the Son, because this is God in flesh. This is who God is. That's what Mark's giving us a picture of. And I think it's really helpful in our world right now, where I feel like the world is a very difficult place. There's a lot going on, personally in our lives, in our community, in our country, in the world. There's so much. And Jesus shows us what God is like in the midst of troubled times. He's present. He's unafraid. He has authority. And so one of the beautiful things that we do every week is we come to Christ's table, we celebrate communion, and in doing that, we're remembering the sacrifice of Jesus. We're receiving him in our hearts by faith. That's what the words of the communion prayer say. But we're acknowledging his authority. I've told you before that when I receive here at the table, when Sarah or Steve or Caleb serves me the elements, I will usually say, I believe. And what I mean by that is I accept the authority that Mark tells us that Jesus has, that Jesus has shown that he has. And so I invite you this morning, in response to God's word, to when you come to the table this morning, to respond, I believe. I accept your authority. I accept that you are Lord of this world, this town, and of my life. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for the gift of your word and the way that you speak to us through it. I pray that your Holy Spirit would minister among us this morning, that it would bring life to these words, that they would be more than words to us, that they would be spoken truth, revealed truth of your authority, and that by interacting with your word and with your spirit, that we would be changed, healed, set free, that we would walk under your lordship, recognizing your authority, that we are not our own, that we belong to you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.